And I guess let's then go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Active Teaching Lab. If you have not been to one of these Active Teaching Labs lately or ever, we try to be as responsive as possible. So these are not canned curriculums where we follow along and make you follow along sort of a preset agenda, at least not at a specific level. We do have a structure of, and let me bring up the activity sheet here to sort of help share that. We do have a structure of that we sort of follow, and on the activity sheet, which Sid is sharing in the chat window there. I'll make it bigger on the screen here for you to see it a little bit better. First of all, we welcome you here to Blackboard Collaborate, and we're going to have a little overview of the session. And today's session is on assessment and remote proctoring. We've got a couple folks here that can help us answer questions about Honorlock, which is the campus-supported tool. These active teaching labs are very much focused on being responsive, as I said. So if you have issues or problems on how to use tools, bring them on. We can't guarantee that we'll know all of the answers, but we can guarantee that we will try to find answers. And I try to get a couple of people to come every week who I know know a lot of answers or know the tools that we talk about and some of the techniques and principles and practices that we work with here. So we are responsive. It is crowdsourced. So we recognize that in addition to those folks that I've invited, you all have expertise and experience teaching and learning and observing and researching and all other sort of experience that you have. So we encourage you to join in with your experience as well and offer your suggestions and tips and resources, because while I have taught, I have not taught many of the types of courses that you are teaching. So I can give you some general suggestions based on things that I've heard from instructors that I've worked with in the past, but I don't have a lot of that direct practical experience, for example, with wet labs or with 500-person courses or a lot of other specialized situations that you're all in. We have a table down here as part of being responsive, where on the left side, I invite you to add your questions, concerns, and ideas. And as we go through the session today, we will try to find answers to them on the right side. And again, if you have any ideas or answers, I encourage you to jump in and add them, just like anonymous quokka, which I didn't even know was an animal. What kind of an animal is a quokka? Might be doing here on the right side. And offer your suggestions and ideas. So let's talk about assessment and remote proctoring. Assessment is a huge part of learning, right? And it's both something that instructors do to sort of see where the students are at. It's kind of in some ways, it's a measure of how successful was I this semester or this last unit or this week, or, you know, if it's a quiz sized assessment, this class, how successful was I in getting these ideas across? Are the students following? Oftentimes in classes, we see their blank stares or they seem blank and we don't know, right? But some sort of quiz or exam, that brings that to the forefront and we can see, oh, they are getting it. Great, let's move on. Or, uh-oh, they're not getting it. Let's back up a little bit. There's also assessment for licensure, right, and certifications, these sort of specialized exams and assessments where we need to show a licensing body that we're being effective and that our students who graduate from our class or pass our class, we can somehow certify that they know the answers. And so there are a lot of assessments that need to be given in certain ways with certain constraints and guidelines. In addition to a lot of very authentic assessments that you might do a little bit more informally, a little bit more personally for the students, where the students can work on a project that is very closely connected to their own path of their own path in the academic journey. If you think back about how you got to the point that you're at right now, it does not look necessarily exactly the same as the people that you work with who are also in your discipline, right? Everybody has a little bit different path where they're like, oh, I veered off and I did a lot of independent study in this area because I was interested in this area, and somebody else was interested in a different area. So those kinds of assessments and those kinds of projects can be really great for helping the students find a personal connection to the material. However, they often come along with, as far as requirements, the need to sort of make sure that everybody is at a certain sort of standardized level. Standardized tests are very popular for that reason. So as part of that sort of high stakes standardized tests, we often think about assessment only in the terms of what will the exam look like? Will this be a 30% of the course grade exam? And I guess throughout this session, I would encourage you, and if you look at the activity of resources that we've put together, we've got a lot of alternatives that, if possible, I would encourage you to use the proctored exam when you need to, but don't think that you need to make that your only source of assessment, because there are a lot of other opportunities. So use the tool in the way that it needs to be used, but if there's a better tool for assessment, then don't use this tool for it. I'm going to scroll past these sessions a little bit. Many questions that you guys are already adding. Good job. And I see people are jumping in on the other side with answers. Thank you for doing that as well. And I want to focus on a couple of things that we do in labs. We have sort of the easy things that you can do, right? So it doesn't take a lot of effort to do some of the easy things. Some of the medium things take a little bit more thought. If you've already tried the easy things and there's still things going on that are challenges, move on to the medium level things. So we've got, as I was just saying, use the tool for what it's used, what it needs to be used for. But if you don't have to use it for that, find other ways to give your assessments. I've got some alternatives right here that I found. This one from Karen Harris of Rutgers is actually, it said a lot of what I was going to say, and so I was like, oh, let's just let her give that presentation and summarize right here. There are a lot of other alternatives as well out there. If you need to do exams in general, here are some strategies for that. And ways to sort of minimize the part exam. Now, I want to put in a quick disclaimer here. I lumped together proctored exam with time exam, thinking that, oh, this is necessary, right? If it's going to be proctored, that means they're sitting in a synchronous place and they've got the webcam check and they've got to sit down and do it all there. And I was corrected, it does not have to be. So you do not necessarily have to have a timed exam that is proctored. Your proctored exams could be timeless, not limited by time. We've got a section on writing less cheatable strategies, right? So if one of your questions, and this is actually right here, if the question or answer to a question is just a click away, which is to say the students can very quickly look it up on the internet, which is fantastic. We do it all the time. then maybe that assessment isn't what needs to happen there, right? Are there bigger questions that you can actually harness that desire of the students to go look up the answer, to make the question or the answer to their question a little bit more personal to them, make them actually do a little bit more work, active research to answer the question rather than a rote memory or a rote quick application of a thing that I've memorized here. So how much of your assessment is based on memory and recall? And should it be? Or are there other alternatives? And then we've got Honorlock, which is the big campus-supported tool right now. In spring, you may recall that we used Examity for a little while. We found some challenges with that and have since moved to Honorlock. I know that there are also challenges with Honorlock, and we've got folks here who can help us work on those. So if you've got questions about Honorlock, in addition to the many, many knowledge base articles on Honorlock, which I've put here for you to click on and explore on your own, we've got folks who might be able to help you out with that. Okay? All right, and then some resources at the bottom. Are there any introductory questions? Would you like to raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask some questions to get us started?
John, I'll get you started.
Awesome, thank you, John.
Sure. Question about Honorlock, because we've been using it for 4 or 5 weeks now, and there are a variety of incidents where the students tell me that it locked up and it timed them out, and then they were waiting for it to come back. So I wondered, are there some time limits on how long it bumps the students out of an exam? And are there some typical reasons why it does that I can alert my students to?
All right.
Hi, this is Mallory Conlon. I'm on the Learn at UW-Madison team, and I kind of, I don't want to say I'm the administrator for Honorlock because it's kind of a complicated setup that we have on campus, but I do a lot of the support for Honorlock. So in general, students get, they call it, a lot of students refer to it as being locked out. It's really their exam is paused. And this typically happens because the student is looking away from the camera. So they need to have their face in view of the camera at least once every minute. If their face is out of the view of the camera for an entire minute, then their exam will be paused and they'll be asked to put their face back in the view of the webcam. So that's the only reason why that would happen if they're looking away from their computer.
An associated question, if it is a timed exam or quiz then and it's paused, is that time added back on, or is that lost time?
No, that time would be lost. There's no stopping of the time in Canvas once the student begins the quiz.
Okay. Thanks.
So yeah, just in general, we provide recommendations for instructors in a KB document that's called Show Your Work. With Honorlock, that's the most typical situation where students will be looking away from the camera for a long time, and we have language that you can share with your students within that KB document.
Is that one of the documents that I shared below, Mallory, or is that?
Yeah, showing your work on an Honorlock exam.
Oh, there it is, number 8. Fantastic. Okay, so good.
Thanks very much.
I have a link in here that was sort of an interesting one. I'm going to try to find it. But if you're familiar with Reddit, there's a UW-Madison Reddit. And a lot of students, several students, have expressed concerns on there. Where do I have that? It must be about enlisted students. No, it's not. There it is. Number 3 under getting started. Consider reading up on how UW-Madison students feel about Honorlock. So I've got a link at the end of that here that opens up a pretty, because it's Reddit and they're a little bit more anonymous than they might be with you. If you ask those questions directly, they can ask some questions about and make some statements about Honorlock. I'm glad, John, that they share their concerns and issues with you. I think that's really important that whatever we do, whether it's assessment and using Honorlock or if it's using Canvas or if it's using discussion, ask your students what works, what doesn't work. We might not be able to address what they're doing or make a change, but it's good to know, at least for you to know, so that you can address that. If you pay attention and address, the students feel that. They recognize that you actually care about that and about their feelings, and they will respond. It's wonderful as a student to know that your instructor's on their side.
I also want to jump in really quick
Yeah.
about the UW-Madison Reddit. This is not me disqualifying student concerns at all. Students are rightfully concerned about their privacy and protecting it. But if you do a deep dive into what students are saying about Honorlock on Reddit, please keep in mind that a lot of what they're saying is inaccurate. Students sometimes are correct about their concerns with Honorlock, but the majority of what they post on Reddit is incorrect. So I would definitely emphasize viewing the UW-Madison FAQ for proctoring as you read what students are posting, just so you can know what is misinformation and what is accurate.
Great, and yes, you will notice that in the language that they use, many of them in their posts will say, well, I haven't used it, but I've heard, or a friend of mine has, and you'll hear a lot of that. That's important to be a good internet critical thinker when you read through any posts on Reddit, of course. So excellent. Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a slight comment of, even if students are inaccurate in a place like Reddit, I think it's good that we all remember that exams are already very, very stressful. And so students going into something that they're uncertain about or afraid about is going to put a lot more stress on them. I know that I don't use Honorlock, but I have had students stressed in my class because they have an exam coming up in a different class and they're, losing their mind a little bit. So I think that we need to recognize that is incredibly real and is going to be affecting all of us, whether or not they are accurate in their assessment.
Yeah, in that section on enlisting the students, I think it's I write, for many students, just an exam alone is a very high stress situation for them. If they're, in a pandemic, some of them are quarantined, some of them actually have had COVID-19. They're isolated from their friends. Please do be aware that this semester is exceptional in a exceptionally high stress level semester for them. So it's really important that we pay attention to our students and the thoughts that they have. And remember that even if they're inaccurate, perceived reality is for them reality, right? So they need to have that conversation. And sometimes those inaccuracies needed to be addressed. And it has not always been the role of the instructor to do that, right? It's often like, I don't necessarily, that's not my job. My job is to provide content to you, but we need to sort of, I think, pay a little bit more attention right now than we have had to in the previous times.
Hi, John. This is Mary Thompson. I am part of the administration in the provost office who helps support Honorlock. And I think when we think about our assessment toolbox, Honorlock is a choice in that toolbox, and I think you did a really nice job of showing that at full strategy and toolbox. I think we often put proctor and high stakes in the same sentence, and I would like to demystify that a little bit for the group. I think Angela and Julie's comments were really right on, that all testing leads to anxiety, but Honorlock can be used in a very low stakes way for quizzing and for knowledge checks and confirmation, for just leveling the playing field for how students use it. And with the KBs, it's not a one size fits all. There's a lot of customizations about, do we only turn on the lockdown browser? Do we add the webcam? Do we allow paper and pencil? What features or what whitelisted URLs are important? Do I want to have a chat feature so that students can ask questions if I have a time window? Is time test really important, given that that leads to more anxiety? The instructor is kind of making the rules about where the anxiety is important for the type of assessment they want to draw. The toolbox of assessment doesn't provide anxiety. I think it's how we set it up and how we, if we know pauses are part of how the tool works, does a time test need a necessary component of learning what students know? So just a few thoughts for people when thinking about what choices they're making and how the tool is customized to their choices. It's not a one thing.
Yes, thank you. And that's, I've got a section in here, thank the really good points and well taken. There are things that you don't have to have in a timed test, right? If it's just a nice to know item, why add that stress level for something that's not needed? If they don't need it to have an authentically timed task in the discipline, do you need to add that stress by making a timed task for the students here, recognizing that this is an exceptionally stressful time? Essays probably do not need to be timed for the most part. If you've already assessed things, do you need to do it again? And then again, my favorite one, if it's cheatable, if it's very easy to get an answer, why do a timed thing? Why not harness the time and say, go spend all the time you want and just give me a really good answer that's full of that sort of that deep level of processing. Good, thank you. All right, let's just start off the top here and go down. How about the issue of privacy? So the remote proctoring reference. So we know that in Zoom, for example, or Blackboard Collaborate, well, in Zoom at least, we have these virtual backgrounds, right? We don't have it in Blackboard Collaborate, but in Teams we do, in Zooms we do. I think WebEx now has it, but that doesn't work in your Honorlock. If you have your students have to do a web search of their room, this is a difficult thing. As somebody put in the answer, you can choose not to have the webcam enabled. So if that's not a concern, or if that's a concern, don't do it. And you can also encourage the students to reserve a room for testing on campus, or even just find a room, say you don't have to do this in the living room with your kid brother or sister running around in the background, right? That'll be a disruptive testing area in general. Go find, a closet or a spot that doesn't have anything that you need to really worry about. And I think there's different approaches there for that. Any other thoughts on that? All right, the next one, is there a way to accommodate masks? Great. We've got a FAQ on the instructional continuity site. I'm wondering if somebody would be willing to turn that into a link to that FAQ, and then I won't have to. But yes, facial features will need to be seen without the mask beforehand, but then they can quickly put the mask on, and thank you, Mallory. My understanding is that it will then work.
So just to
Again,
follow up on that, John,
yeah.
It's true then that after the mask is on, that the facial recognition works with what remains to be seen?
Yeah, so I can talk about that a little bit. We did check in with the vendor, Honorlock, to make sure that once a student puts a mask back on, that their facial recognition will still work, and they said yes, it will. So after the student begins the exam, even if the webcam is enabled, they can still wear a mask.
That's reassuring. Thank you. All right. Can they use Excel, so another computer program, or scratch paper on their desk during an Honorlock session? And if so, how is that configured? So I've heard also that if you open up another program or go to another browser tab, that will pause the test. Now that I've not ever used it because I'm not teaching a class that would require it. So I guess I don't know the answer to that, but my understanding is that causes a problem. Is that correct, Mallory?
So I know the answer to this. Only if Browser Guard is enabled will students have any issues with accessing other websites or other applications on their computer. So if you want students to use Excel or if you want them to be able to do Google searches, just do not enable Browser Guard, which is Honorlock's lockdown browser feature.
All right. So you can actually have a proctored exam where they go off and explore the internet deeply to do some really deep processing application answers, but just don't enable the browser guard, otherwise that won't work.
Yep,
So again,
exactly.
controls are up to the instructor. Good, thank you. All right, what is the setup time for the Honorlock administrivia of the room check and setup for the student? It looks like that's about 5 minutes, depending on all the settings that the instructor chooses. I guess my question is that part of the, if it's a timed proctored exam, does that 5 minutes count towards the exam, or is that a before
That's a before
thing?
the exam. So if you have a timed exam, the exam doesn't start until the authentication process with Honorlock is finished. So it does not take up any student time.
Great, so that's good. Going back to John Fotenhauer's initial question, when the students look away and Honorlock pauses, that timer keeps on working for that though. So give your students a practice exam, give them a chance to sort of test this out, and those resources for students down in the below in the KB docs for students, so that they get familiar with it before you, so that they aren't walking into an Honorlock exam and they're like, what's happening right here, right? The more familiar, the better. Again, the first time it'll be scary, so make it a low stakes or no stakes thing. Probably make it low stakes. If it's no stakes, they won't do it, right? Because they game your thinking that way. You're teaching that way. And then the second one, make it low stakes, and maybe the third time if you do it, now you can start sort of upping the stakes once they get more familiar with it. Recognize also that some of your students, it may be the first class that they have to take an Honorlock exam. Other students might really be very familiar with it already, and so they'll sail through it. That introduces issues of equity, right? So keep it in mind. All right, and we've got a town hall for Honorlock coming up on October 14th, and I expect we'll get a link to that so that if you're interested in it, you can go register on that link. All right, okay, racial bias in the software. Man, that's a question I don't know the answer to at all. I know that there are concerns. Whether they're real or not, I don't know.
I'll take that question, John. This is Mary Thompson again. So racial bias and online proctoring has been raised in several articles, and I think the concern is real. This is machine learning, AI. It's not human live proctoring. So that's important to remember. Some of the questions here alluded that there's a person watching the student take an exam. Honorlock, what we have, the vendor that we're working with is using AI proctoring. And that AI tool works best when they can see 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, or a mask, that like we've tested. But if there are if a student is of any color or race is backlit with and it's dark, or there's not good contrast, or their face is out of view and the exam is paused, some people have led that is about racial bias, and it's something we've looked into when we went through the RFP process for Honorlock, and it's something that we've taken very seriously. If we hear concerns, we have not had any formal complaints on campus, and Honorlock has served over 7.5 million exams to date, and they have not received racial bias complaints when we checked in with them about how many racial complaints they have received from the tool and the software they use. Being said, though, if students are experiencing, it's always good to check in with the customizations you're choosing, and to remember that students don't know that they're being flagged in the exam. The flags are high, medium, and low. That's in the FAQ, and that's at an instructor discretion. So when an instructor reviews the exam, it's based on the instructor's review of what they're seeing and what they're looking for. And so the best practice in that event is to be really clear as an instructor about what your expectations are in the exam, and to let them know what you're looking for so they know what to expect, to also help with that anxiety that we talked about before. No, we don't use real person proctoring. Yep, just
Correct.
AI.
We just use the AI version.
Yep.
And in some ways that's good, because that does or can take out sort of the real person biases that we all have. In other ways, when we build these AIs, we, in the past, and probably continue to, build in automatic biases as well. And it's an issue that I think is continues to happen in AI, but it is one that I know that the AI community is working on. So if you are an instructor, I guess one of the things that you can do is, if you are noticing that there are a lot more people with darker skin, for example, or other incidents of racial bias that you notice, do pay attention to that and let us know what's happening. And by let us know, I think, I don't know, would that be instructional continuity at wisc.edu? Or I'm not sure where that gets reported to.
Use the instructional continuity website, and that is monitored by the provost's office. We can take
Great.
those concerns up. Thanks, John.
Yep, great. Good. Julie, you have a question.
Yeah, hi, John. Thanks. And thanks, everybody, for having this discussion. I think it's super important. I just wanted to clarify that my understanding of this concern is that it's that the facial recognition software has trouble recognizing darker skin. So it's not so much a concern about an inherent human bias as it is a manifestation of a problem with the machine, which still has the same impact. So I just want to be clear that that's not, that's that I've been hearing, and we should definitely take it seriously.
And again, I've said this in the past, but if you do not have to use Honorlock, please find alternatives, right? That that can do the job that you need, that you want done. Mary, I think you were about to say something.
Nope, I'm good. I think we do take it very seriously, so I'm glad that this question's been asked.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. All right. Can Honorlock be used for students doing a written exam that they scan and photograph and upload into Canvas? Oh, that's an interesting question. And it looks like we've got a document on it showing your work. So that's fantastic. And I think the short answer of that is, I'm going to quick scan through that.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, but it's difficult. So if you don't have to, not recommended.
Okay. So, all right. Yep, I do see a 6-step thing. Okay. Yeah, use the tool the way the tool is designed. We can always bend the tools a little bit to do some gymnastics, but it's tougher. All right, good. What are some best practices or recommendations around orienting students to Honorlock? And what is the difference between practice exams and simulated exams? Ooh, I don't know the difference between practice exams and simulated exams. We've got
Hi, Mallory again. I can talk about this. So definitely best practice is give your students a lot of experience using a tool. This is true with any sort of online tools that you're adding into Canvas. You want to give them experience with it before you actually assess them on anything using that particular tool. And so Canvas quizzes or anything that you're using, you want to make sure that you have a practice exam. A practice exam is generally used for Canvas quizzes. So when you build an exam into Canvas, you can make that into a practice exam, or Honorlock has a canned practice exam that you can use for students. A simulated exam is basically how you create a practice exam if you're using a third-party tool like Atomic Assessments or a publisher digital learning tool like WebAssign. So that is when you would use a simulated exam where it takes the student through the process of setting up their exam using Honorlock, but it doesn't really matter to students so much. It just doesn't actually record the video of them, and it doesn't get billed toward our number of uses for Honorlock. So that's the main difference between those two things.
So they can take as many simulated exams as they want and it won't get billed, but the university does have a fee associated with every other
No.
Honorlock exam?
With
No?
every student that takes the exam. So we have 20,000 student licenses. So each student can take an unlimited number of exams.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of getting into the weeds of it a little bit. I wouldn't worry about that too much.
All right.
But there is a limit. So Honorlock has asked us to only per course give 2 simulated exams because they don't want people to take advantage of the students in the class, because students won't know that it's a simulated exam. So they'll think that they're being proctored, but they actually aren't. So they don't want people to use that unless it's for a practice exam.
Okay. Very good. And yeah, so why subject them to that undue stress as well? Good. All right. I want to take another quick break here before we go on to the next one and open it up to any other questions or thoughts that are swirling around in your head right now. Anyone? Okay, and again, I open invitation. Raise your hand if you do have a question, and we'll definitely honor that. All right, what would be the best approach to proctor an exam that is assigned outside of the regular class period and that lasts about 2 hours? How do you make the tests available to students, and how do you monitor the students during the exam period? Oh, I'm so glad you're here, Mallory. Thank you for coming. So it's an exam window, and it's common practice. And I like this. You can assign a time window over several days that gives students that are having maybe issues with their children who are in school as well, a little bit more flexibility in when they need to take that time. Again, if you require that students only take a time within a very short exam window, you don't know what's happening to them at home. Back in our face-to-face days, and for those of you who are still doing face-to-face, they are all there in your classroom in the same situation, same setting, so we have a little bit more control about the distractions that are occurring. But if this is happening at their own home, we don't know what's happening. So these larger exam windows are a little bit more equitable for students, right, from various backgrounds. Some who have their lovely offices in a separate room are lucky, and they can handle short exam windows with no problem. But those who have kids at home, for example, or younger siblings at home who are also in school or running around in the same room, that can be difficult for them. All right. And then there's a follow-up. How would I take the same approach as provided, but that I can be present, that I can be present? All right, so having the instructor present in case they have questions. There is a chat feature in
So
In Honorlock or exam? Go ahead.
yeah, let me talk about this one a little bit. So there is like a help chat button in Honorlock, but that connects students to Honorlock support. So if they have any technical problems that they run into, um, then they'll be able to reach out to Honorlock support directly. I've worked with a couple of instructors so far, and what we found to be the most useful, and of course this depends on your settings, like if you have browser guard enabled, things will be a little bit different. But you can basically include a link to like a Piazza discussion board, a link to like your office hours rooms, like in Blackboard Collaborate or Zoom or something like that. You can share a link with your students if you have like a shorter time period that the exam is happening in, where you'll be available to answer questions. So you can add an approved URL, which is what whitelisted means. You can add an approved URL for students to visit during the exam if you have browser guard enabled.
All right, so you can be in Piazza during the exam window, ready to answer questions. And if the students are in there taking the exam, they might not ever show up in Piazza, but if they do have a content-related question, they can click on that approved or allowed URL and get into Piazza where you can answer their question, and then they go back into the exam. If it is a timed exam, that time that they're gone still counts, though. So this is a thing that the clock will keep on ticking, correct?
If you have to. So remember, John, the time is only clicked if an instructor chooses a timed exam. So that's why we're talking about exam windows. So
yeah, right. So it does it counts for the exam window, whether it's a time-limited exam or not.
correct.
The window will be all right. Thank you. All right, and very good. And in Honorlock, it can be allowed. It's a link that the instructor can set up in those settings. They don't have to go to the CIO and say, I would like this link approved, correct?
Nope, they should just be able to add it into the Honorlock setup when they're creating their exam.
All right, great. Thank you very much. All right, this question is open to everybody. So if you have experience with this, we encourage you to jump into the right-hand column as well. What experiences have others had with non-proctored open book notes, quizzes, or exams, and how has that been going? Lessons learned. So a lot of those things that we talked about down below on the activity sheet, are people finding that there are things that they absolutely need to have an Honorlock proctored exam for, or have other people have? Are you finding new ways to not do proctored exams? And I want to open up to all of the participants here and see if there's anybody who's got a favorite open book or note quiz or non-proctored exam that they've had experience with. Are you seeing the students cheating or other concerns? I'll give you like 30 seconds to be brave and answer. Raise your hand. All right, Haley.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm an instructional designer, so I just have one secondhand anecdote to share. But I learned of it because the instructor needed a window to be extended. A student was actually taking the final exam quiz on her phone in the car while like traveling to work. So she had let the instructor know of the circumstances and, she was granted the extension, but that was just kind of interesting to me. So, there was a time window there, but I think with, communication expectations and policy around that, it could be flexible enough.
Yeah. It would also be very risky, like if you start an exam on your phone and then you drive out of that coverage center, or if something happens, or you find that there's an answer that you just can't answer on this sized screen, it would be interesting to have to deal with that.
Right. I'm sorry. That was my point. She lost coverage, so the exam kind of auto submitted when the time was up, but she hadn't completed it all.
Okay, all right, I
Yeah.
misheard you.
Thank you.
I thought you were like sharing. So it can be done. It's very flexible, but I'm like, ah.
Yeah.
All right,
Risky
good.
still. Yeah.
It's risky. And again, communicate with your students. Give them maybe an opportunity to take a practice exam, and say, do you want to take it on a phone? Try it out first before it counts. Lauren.
So I would love to hear from anyone who, I struggle with this idea of, I know students have jobs, I get that, that makes perfect sense. But if they're also trying to be a student, I really struggle with this, I can't come to class today because I have to work. Or it seems like once we moved into remote settings, there's been a whole lot more of this sort of laxness towards the fact that they are enrolled students and have certain responsibilities. And when I hear this story about this person who's going somewhere for work in the car trying to do a test on a phone,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, I don't know, I knock my head against the wall and say, really? Am I crazy to feel that way? Am I like too close-minded? Can somebody enlighten me why this is okay?
I saw another hand. Who's that? Haley, your hand again, right?
Yeah. So I'm definitely not answering your question directly, but I should have also mentioned this was a student in what's called the part-time Master of Social Work program. So it is expected that all of these students are working. And it was, yeah, so I think that's what I also should have added as a caveat to that instance.
But Lauren, you do bring up a really interesting point that I think, is part of a larger discussion. The nature of teaching and learning has changed, right? Just as the nature of working remotely has changed, right? I will take a break and go take my dog for a walk. I couldn't do that when I was in the office, right? The expectation was that I was sort of around and in front of my desk in my little cubicle throughout the day, or out visiting instructors or whatever. But now that expectation isn't necessarily there. There's a little bit more flexibility. And I find that I'm working a little bit later some days or starting a little bit earlier, but doing these other things. If that's the case in work, does it still hold true that we need to sort of be rigid in our education, our classes as well? John,
So
you've got thoughts.
I agree with what you're saying, John, the caveat being that I don't think you would take your dog for a walk when you knew you had a meeting.
True point.
So
Yeah,
that's where I get confused about what makes this okay. I have no problem with breaks and all of that kind of stuff. I take them too, but I definitely don't take them when I'm supposed to have a meeting.
right. Or during the test. John.
Yeah, I'm going to add some old school perspective here. I do think that when it comes time to assessing whether people know things, whatever information it is, there's an element of focus that's required to give your best response. And so I would hope that you train students that if you want to be finding out, measuring whether I know something or not, that I will give you my full attention to answer that question. And so that's, I do think that it matters.
All right, excellent. And in the chat, we've got Jijin has some ideas as well. It's important to set up expectations and have clear boundaries of the syllabus. And I think that, yes, that's absolutely also true. Even during remote instruction, um, to have both allow times for flexibility, but also have times where when you do need to focus, you need to focus. And that gets to both Lauren's point and your point, John. Good. All right, we've got 3 more questions and we've got 6 more minutes. Is a home test a viable option in this case, I intend to provide a test that challenges the students while being comprehensive of the circumstances. Can somebody, whoever put that, can you say a little bit more about that in unmute and explain? I'm not sure I'm following this. I'm not sure how one can be comprehensive of the circumstances of COVID instruction. So if somebody can unmute and help me understand that. And we'll revisit that, okay? If we have time. Oh, yes.
Yeah. I posted that question. Sorry, my microphone.
Oh, no worries.
Again, hello everyone. I'm a grad student in mechanical engineering, and I posted that question. Critical case. I've heard other instructors that during this online structure time, they prefer to ease, I guess, both the students and themselves in terms of, okay, I'm just gonna make a home test. Thinking about not only everybody but also those that have been quarantined because they themselves have COVID, for example. And so I guess what I was thinking is, are there both, if you as an instructor want to make a test that is challenging enough but still being comprehensive of the circumstances that they would not be able to ask questions about or during the test, and they probably will be able to collaborate among students if that's something that you want, like is a home test still viable during this online instruction if you want all that at the same time?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for elaborating on that. I'm going to post this link again on why internet-based education, and this leads to an article that one of my colleagues and friends, Morten Gernsbacher, wrote about internet-based education, and she talks about the designing exams that allow for that deeper processing, right? So they are not proctored. They aren't, and they will ask the student to apply something that oftentimes requires the student to go out and do some internet research on their own, which is where we do research these days, right? At least web-based stuff. So that is a lot more flexible. Students can talk to their colleagues the way that you would talk to a colleague to solve a problem that you're having in your discipline. But she doesn't see that necessarily as a bad thing. She sees it as part of the learning process. So this might not work so well if you have something you need to certify, that they absolutely have this in their brain, right? So for some accreditation courses or exams, assessments, this might not be the way to do it, but it's possible. So there are some things. All right, stereotype threat and remote proctoring. Good question. We addressed that a little bit. Well, we addressed a related issue, but stereotype threat is actually not one that we've talked to. I want to reemphasize. Oh, Mary had mentioned that campus had data on this. Mary?
I don't remember mentioning that in an IC meeting, so we can talk off online about that. I saw that and I'm happy to reach out, but if we do, I'm not aware of it, but I can talk about how we are messaging the tools, which is the second part of that question. We're doing a lot. Mallory and I work really carefully to make sure that the FAQs are up to date. We've added KBs as we've learned from consultations and work. We're hosting 5 UW-themed Honorlock sessions to answer questions. And we work very closely that if there are concerns that are addressed, that we do ask the vendor for support and helping us understand how to support everyone who is using the tool or who wants to try using the tool. With that said, our campus messaging, besides the instructional continuity site, we have had several articles in Inside UW. We've messaged in the weekly to students. We've shared information with advisors so that they can help if students are having, and we work very closely with the McBurney Center so that we are good collaborators and partners throughout this process. So we've been trying to do a lot of outreach, and if others on this call have more ideas on how we can do that better, given the limitations and kind of saturation of communication during COVID, we're open. There's a lot of different ways to reach out to Mallory and I. Mallory at the Do It Help Desk, myself at the Instructional Continuity website, and we have helped specific instructors and departments through those channels.
All right. Hey, it's 2 o'clock and we end at 2 o'clock, so there are a couple of things that we did not get to right now. And I will try to answer them in the table here in the next few minutes, but you're all free to go. As always, I will stick around for the next couple of minutes to answer any questions that you might want to ask, but not in front of everybody. So I'll stick around for that. And thank you all for participating. Thank you especially Mallory and Mary for jumping in and helping me answer all these questions that I don't know the answer to because I don't have the experience in, both on policy and practice with the tool. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming by. If you're in my LTT class,